Welcome to Science on Tap. You'll notice that normally in Science on Tap I have a beer with my guest, but my guest doesn't like the way beer tastes. And we're going to be talking about why he doesn't and why we all have different tastes and what our taste means. My guest is Alfredo Fontanini. Dr. Alfredo Fontanini, who is Assistant Professor of Neurobiology and Behavior at Stony Brook University. And what he studies is what he believes is our most complex, our most fascinating, and our most intriguing sense. And that's not our sense of sight or our sense of sound, but our sense of taste. And to a large extent, he believes that we are what we taste. So without further ado, let's talk about that connection that you have studied between the tongue and the brain. What happens in your brain when you taste something?
Hi, Steven. How are you?
Hello.
So, well, I mean, that's a question that probably takes 5 lives of 100 or 1,000 researchers to answer. And, just shrinking that in 20 seconds, in its simplest way, when we put something in our mouth, the chemicals that are in the food or in the drinks that we're tasting just activates a series of receptors on the tongue and create a signal. Then the signal gets propagated through nerves all the way up at different stations in the brain. Now, I don't really care that much all the stations down because I'm a cortex-centric person, meaning that I'm mostly interested in understanding what happens once the signal makes all the way to the neocortex. The neocortex.
Now, we have on our tongue taste buds.
Absolutely.
We can even see our taste buds to
Yes.
some extent.
Yes, we can see the papillae and we can easily visualize them.
So we will taste the food, but we don't really taste it until it gets to our brain.
Absolutely.
And it
yes.
gets to a part of our brain, an important part of our brain called the cortex.
Yes.
And there is even a part of the cortex that deals with taste.
Oh, and that's the best part of the cortex, if you ask me.
That's what you say. And what part is that
and
called?
that's called the gustatory cortex.
The gustatory cortex, like gusto, like...
Yes, like taste in Latin. And, for those who know the secret handshake, that's an area that is tucked inside an even more mysterious area that is called insular cortex. And so the gustatory cortex is where all our sensations of taste and of perception of flavor emerge and become conscious.
So literally, do we taste it when it hits our tongue, or it has to get to the gustatory cortex?
Oh, I mean...
We have to be conscious of the taste in order to taste it.
Yes, absolutely. There are multiple ways to answer that question. So we certainly can behave, we can reject food even without being conscious of that. That has been studied in humans and in animals. To have very simple and elementary reactions like yucking or spitting something, we don't need the cortex for that. But to be fully aware of what we're tasting, to be able to describe it and to be able to be conscious about it, yes, we do need the cortex. Not only the cortex, of course.
What makes taste such a special sense? What makes taste unique among our senses?
Well, there are many ways in which taste is unique. And you'll see when you talk to a neuroscientist who's studying sensory systems, they're always going to come out with ways in which their sensory systems are unique. Now, don't listen to them, just listen to what I'm saying.
Right, okay.
So taste is unique, I think, at least in my opinion, because it has a unique relationship with emotion. And the example that I usually like to make is, if I show just this piece of paper to your visual system, you're going to see a white square on some background, and that square is not going to have any emotional value attached to it, right? It's going to be a white square with some edges. And this is a very simple stimulus for your visual system. Now, if I take an equally simple stimulus for your gustatory system, which would be, say, a droplet of sugar or a drop of something very bitter, you will not only perceive something that has a physical and a chemical nature, it's sweet or bitter, but you also will perceive a sense of pleasantness if you taste something sweet, or a sense of aversion if you taste something bitter. And really, while in many other sensory systems you can separate the dimensions, in taste you can't. You can't, it's very difficult to come up with a stimulus, particularly for animals, that is just neutral, that doesn't evoke any emotional reaction.
So you can have a neutral sound, you can look at something that would produce no emotional reaction, but very unusual to experience a taste and not have an emotion attached to it.
Absolutely. In a way, taste is like constantly seeing pictures of your loved ones, but
or someone you hate.
Or someone you hate, yes.
Now, taste is also
it's
unique.
Like reading the news and discovering about Berlusconi running again for president.
Right.
Sorry.
But taste is also, in terms of how we get the taste, there's a lot of the, one of the cliches is, you talk about someone that wears their heart on their sleeve, right? Meaning they're very emotional, they're maybe oversensitive. If you could redesign the human being, you might take the tongue out of our mouths, and if not, put it on our sleeves and put it somewhere else.
Why
is that?
Absolutely. I mean,
why is that?
In a way, and that might just be one of my crazy rants, and I often go off those directions when I try to be a little bit creative. But it doesn't make complete sense that we need to put things in our mouth to taste them. In theory, the best way to taste something would be to have some sensors on your hands so that we could touch food before putting it in our mouth.
If this is poisonous, it would make a whole lot more sense for me to know it by doing this
instead of sticking it in your mouth. Now, fortunately, we already evolved mechanisms, and so in reality, the solution to this problem already exists. We really don't taste only with our mouth. We're constantly trying to interpret the environment. We're constantly trying to guess what's in front of us and infer whether it's poisonous or whether it's good for us from its odor, its sight, less frequently its sound.
Now we could shut our eyes, we could put our hands over our ears so we could block out those sensory inputs, so to speak. But with taste, we actually have to be a little bit more active to experience it. We're just going to not taste it by sitting here. We have to literally put something in our mouths and get it on our tongues.
Absolutely.
Which also is a difference, right?
And that's why, tasting something is always a decision. We can happen to see something without wanting or hear something without wanting, but tasting always comes at the end of a situation in which we interpret what we have in front of us and we decide to put it in our mouth. And so that's why, by the way, it's so important for taste stimuli to evoke emotional reactions, to be good or to be aversive. Because if something is good, that's a way to guarantee that you're going to consume more of it. Likewise, if something is aversive, that's a way for your brain to tell to your decision-making processes to not consume what could actually be dangerous for you.
Is finding something delicious purely a function of the physical nature, or is it also the emotional component of it? Why do we find one thing delicious and another thing repulsive?
Well,
why don't you find beer tasty, for instance?
Well, I think we need to dig back in evolution. And so we need to take us out of a pub and go back in the wild and devolve into monkeys and all the way back. And really, the way that in which animals and organisms are designed is really to maintain themselves. And so it's an obvious statement. An animal wants to consume whatever supports its life, and wants to avoid whatever threatens its life. And so the brain has evolved mechanisms to ensure that these processes are guided. And so if we take pleasure from something that is good, then we know that we're going to consume it. If we take pleasure from something that is necessary for our body, that's a drive to go out in the wild and risk and hunt to get something that sustains our body.
So why isn't broccoli delicious, for instance? If it's so good for you,
Well,
why doesn't it
absolutely.
taste good?
Well, I mean, we have evolved very far away from where we started. And it certainly is the case that while we are designed with a set of blueprints of liking things that are sweet and disliking things that tend to be bitter or sour, in reality, another fundamental feature for our gustatory system that our gustatory system needs to have to help us evolve is plasticity. And so we need to be able
Meaning
to overturn.
it can change.
Absolutely.
It can be molded.
Absolutely.
We can learn to love a food not just by being beaten into it by our mothers.
Well, also, but yes, it is absolutely important for a system that grants our survival to be flexible. And so, as animal, we live in we evolved in different habitats and in different situations where different foods were available. And while there is a general tendency to sweet things to carry calories, and bitter substances to be poisons, in reality, there are subtle differences depending on the environment, and being able to adapt to those differences can actually make the survival
There are not many
differences.
sweet poisons out there in the natural world.
In the natural world, generally not. Poisons tend to be bitter, and that's why we dislike bitter. And we have a relatively complex relationship with sour, but at high concentrations, sour signals over-fermented fruit, and so a very high bacterial load. So in general, our gustatory system has evolved to make sure that we stay away from the two things that could really kill us, which is bacterial loads, and so infections, and poisons. And so that's why naively we dislike things that are very bitter or things that are very sour.
So the bottom line is there's no accident why we like in general, why we like certain things and don't like certain things. We've evolved that
yes,
way.
absolutely.
We've evolved that way out of real practicality. We've needed it in order to survive,
Absolutely.
in order to have nutrition,
I mean,
in
that's
order
the
to
same
avoid being
reason.
poisoned.
The same reason why we like fat, because fat contains a lot of calories. We evolved in a context in which animal fat was very hard to find, and so we evolved with this strong tendency to binge when it's available. Now, of course, this tendency at this point in this context has become counterproductive.
Because we're extremely different than we were
Yes.
in the times
Well,
that we've evolved.
we're
We
not
live in a
that
different
different,
world,
but we
right?
live in a very different environment. In a way, what has happened is that we keep evolving at the pace of evolution, and the environment has evolved at a much higher speed, and that has created a mismatch.
Now, one of the reasons that you know all these things is because you work with
Rats.
rats. And like us, rats are omnivores, meaning they like to consume
Yes,
a lot
absolutely.
of different things. But what are the key things that you learn from rats that are very applicable to us, and what do you do with your rats?
Well, I mean, it's always surprising to discover how similar we are with rats. And we're similar in probably one of the things that we thought we would be very different. You know, we like to fancy ourselves as being choosy and sophisticated in our taste. And we always look at the rat as this animal that pretty much eats everything that is available. But in reality, we're both omnivores, and we both have very, very similar type of challenges. So, as in the case of the rat, we need to be able to choose the exact food, because we're not hardwired to like something or like a very specific set of food. We could like many different.
So it's not necessarily easy to be an omnivore.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, it's counterintuitive in a way.
No,
It would
but,
seem like I like anything, so anywhere I go, I can eat it.
Yes, but that also makes you more exposed to the risk of eating poisons. That's why, again, counterintuitive, but rats are extremely picky. And
They're picky omnivores.
they're picky omnivores, yes. And as a matter of fact, rats need to learn to like things. And this usually happens through a learning phenomenon, which is extremely interesting. It's a social learning. It's a form of communication between rats. In the burrow, rats communicate constantly through mostly odors and chemicals and food. And so when a rat goes in the wild, consumes an entirely new food, let's say strawberries, and goes back to the burrow, the other fellows who have never experienced the strawberry will start smelling the face of the rat.
So a rat comes back home and his wife says, what's that I smell on your breath?
Exactly.
And the rat says, strawberry.
Strawberry, and all of a sudden
everyone
loves strawberries. Wife loves strawberries.
But they communicate that way.
So, yes, this has actually been studied very well, and it's a form of learning that has been used to understand how our brain mediates our changes in taste.
Obviously, he didn't like what he was tasting over here because he knocked it over.
That's the ultimate aversion, right?
The ultimate, and this is one of your students, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, I see. Okay.
My wife's student.
Oh, your wife's
Or
student.
actually,
Okay.
dipping himself into beer might be the ultimate way of
I
liking
see.
it.
Okay. Now, you can actually tell when a rat doesn't like something he or she ingests, and it's not because the rat is saying something to you.
Oh no, and not
And
even
that's
because.
going to lead us into a little experience. We're going to offer some volunteers in a second. But how can you tell whether a rat doesn't like something?
Well, I mean, this is always a challenge for scientists to study emotions and studies affective behaviors in animals. So how do you know that a rat is liking something? Well, you know, by now I spent enough time with rats that probably, you know, I even understand what they say. But in reality, it's enough to look at their faces. And there's a couple of very interesting studies that have been done comparing the facial expressions of rats or mice, baby monkeys, and humans, baby humans.
So when a rat ingests something it doesn't like, it's going to make an expression
Absolutely, yes.
that is
Absolutely,
very
yes.
similar to the expression that anybody
that we all
room
made
would
when we were babies. Yes.
Okay.
So you can have a rat, for instance, drinking something bitter, and they're going to make the classical yucky face. It's called gape, and so the corners of the mouth gets pulled back there, like. I always try to avoid to make these silly faces, but so when someone talks about rats, for some reason it's unavoidable to start making the faces that also rats make.
Because they also have an aversion. We're looking for 3 volunteers to help us figure out what it is you're tasting, whether you have an aversion to it or whether or not you find it pleasant just by your facial expressions, and whether these tastes absolutely signal a facial expression involuntarily. So can we have, nothing is poisonous here, by the way, can we have 3 volunteers to come up here? Come right up. 1, 2, 3. Come on up. Okay. Now, come right up and just stand in front here. We'll stand on either side. Thank you for being so brave. Who else is coming?
They're all women, Steven.
What can I do? The men are chicken. The men are chicken. So here, move over a little bit more. And Alfredo, why don't you, we're not going to say what this tastes like.
Yeah.
But we're going to say that not everybody has the same response to this.
Yes.
Right.
So there should be different responses.
Should be
for
different responses.
people.
So what I'm going to ask you to do is to put this in your mouth and keep it on your tongue. Let me give them out first, and then we'll ask you at the count of 3 to put them on your tongue. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All the way in. All the way in. No, don't eat it. Don't eat it. Never,
No. That would be poisonous.
What are you tasting?
Really bitter.
Really bitter.
Really bitter.
Like horseradish.
Really bitter.
Only a little sour.
Only a little sour. And
Sour or bitter.
Alfredo, here. Here's yours.
Oh, thank you. That was
And
so
where's
kind and
mine?
considerate of you.
And where's mine? Because Alfredo has a bitter, and we didn't really have a big gape going
No,
on
we
here,
didn't.
did we?
But that proves
We had a
that
slight gape. I don't want to give myself
That's
two.
why I study rats
The
instead of
last
humans.
time I did this,
And they're more reliable.
I have very little response to this. Almost none. Takes a few minutes. So without, I don't have
It's
anything.
horrible.
Horrible, and you have that expression. So if we didn't say what it was, you might know. Now, let's put those on the table, and let's have three. We won't tell you what's in this water. It's not vodka, unfortunately. And let's all take a taste of that water. Go ahead. Yeah, you can take it. That's not gonna. Well, you gape at sweetness, which is a whole different evolutionary development. So what does this tell us? First of all, everyone is going to taste this equally sweet. Is that not correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are differences. The fact that we saw different reactions to the bitter strip shows that different people have different sensitivities to tastes. And that has been widely studied. And so we know just the tip of the iceberg, that we have very different thresholds for perceiving what is bitter, but we probably also have very different thresholds for perceiving different odors and different aromas. And that proves the point that while there is a general blueprint around which our gustatory system has evolved, there's a very big individual variability about taste. And the other point is that while, again, this proves the point that rats are slightly more reliable in their facial expressions, but you could probably tell from the expressions that sweet was more pleasant than bitter. And now, if you did the same to a baby, and I did try something analogous with my son. My wife is not here,
Has
so
he
now I can
forgiven you
confess.
yet? Has he forgiven you yet?
He's not here, and that proves the point that he hasn't forgiven yet.
You can.
So
can
if you
sit
do
down.
that with a baby, you would see the
you
baby
very much.
making big gapes and pulling the tongue out, signaling aversion. Or when you give the baby sugar, they're going to lick their lips. And that's exactly the same reaction that a rat would make. And so what you can do as a scientist, you can study these reactions. These reactions have been very well defined methodologically, and you can quantify it. And from these reactions, you can now all of a sudden peek into the psychology of the animal. And you can guess, you can actually do more than guessing. You know whether the animal is liking or disliking what you're giving it.
Well, speaking of disliking what you give an animal, the greatest gape that Alfredo may have ever experienced was when he was a young child, when he and his poor family learned that he absolutely hated fruit of any kind.
Oh, and vegetables.
Oh, and vegetables of any, well, that's more normal, but fruit of any kind. And it took many, 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 many years for him to overcome his aversion to fruit, and he's still working on it. So when we come back, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about aversion to a kind of food, what you can do to overcome the aversion to a kind of food, and why our evolutionary tastes and our emotional tastes have really created a set of problems and challenges for people as we try to survive in the 21st century. So we'll be right back.